Welcome, Nesties, to day 2 of OwlCrate-A-Con. I'm so excited to introduce our first panel of the day, Growing Up Middle Grade, where I'll be chatting with H.D. Hunter, P. Djèlí Clark, and Scott Reintgen, where we'll be talking about the now and the future of middle grade. So, Scott, I'm going to start with you. If you can just tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
I just want to say thanks for the music. I feel like that's the closest I've become to being a professional athlete. Like that was the moment right there. So my name is Scott Reintgen. I write middle grade. I write young adult. My most recent middle grade series is The Problem with Prophecies. It follows a girl named Celia Cleary, who's like normal girl, normal school, normal everything, except for on her 4,444th day of life, she gets her first prophetic vision. And that vision just happens to show her neighbor, also a 7th grader, Jeffrey Johnson, dying. So she does what anyone would do with that knowledge. She goes and saves him and thinks, wow, like I have this great gift. Only she realizes very quickly that he is going to die over and over again. And she's up against fate itself now. And so her 7th year is basically like homework and like making friends and then saving Jeffrey's life. And the question of the book is just like, can she actually save him for good? Will she be stuck saving him forever? Or is she just kind of doomed to lose because death is pretty undefeated? And that's the question of the story.
Okay, and Djèlí.
Hi, everyone. I'm P. Djèlí Clark. I also write adult fiction for the most part. This is my first foray into middle grade. Sort of my first foray is a book called The Benny Song, because I did write an adult book by the name of a novella by the name of The Black God's Drums. It crossed over into middle grade. So I've had that luck, and I'm hoping that whatever I did in that one, I figured out with this. This story itself is one of those stories I've always wanted to write. I grew up on a lot of fantasy, middle grade fantasy, YA fantasy when I was younger. And so this is my ode to that. It's about a young girl by the name of Benny who lives in this small forest and a setting that is reminiscent in some ways to West Africa, traditional West Africa. And it's her birthday. And what could possibly go wrong except her village being attacked, except a village being attacked by these magical creatures and everyone being taken off. And she ends up basically a witch's apprentice because, of course, it's her birthday. And from there, much of the story follows her attempt to be this reluctant apprentice, but also her desire to save the people of her village, right? And there's a big baddie there by the name of the witch priest, and there are monsters, and there's magic. There's a house that's bigger on the inside with hundreds of rooms. There's a straw man who fights. There's a lot of things. There's a giant salamander who mimics things. And the main thrust of this story really, it's about it's coming of age story about this young girl, but it's also her trying to find her family that's been lost and trying to reconnect and making some interesting friends along the way. So yeah.
Amazing. And last but not least, Hugh.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Hugh, or H.D. Hunter. I am the author of Futureland, Battle for the Park, and The Nightmare Hour, which is the second book in the series. I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a community organizer, teaching artist, and a substitute teacher. So to my kids that I sub for, I'm really just like the not coolest person in the world. Futureland is the story of Cameron Walker. He's here in the middle. He lives in a theme park that travels all around the world. So instead of you having to go visit the park, it'll come to your city at some point in time. His parents decide to bring the park to Atlanta for the first time since Cam has been born. And as soon as it gets there, the tech that runs the park starts glitching. And on opening night of the park, there's a local kid who visits who goes missing. So it becomes Cam's job with his new friends that he's met since he moved to Atlanta to start to form like their own little mystery solving team, discover why the tech is glitching, where the missing kids are going, and they uncover this really big conspiracy that takes us over the course of 3 books.
Amazing. Okay, so we're going to jump in to the questions. So what factors do you take into account when you're writing for the middle grade age range? And how do you strike a balance between fun and important topics? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I think starting with the second question first, I would say my editor keeps me keeps me balanced when trying to talk about fun versus important topics. I think I'm more of like the topic one in the relationship, and so just finding like that balance with someone who is like complementary to your work and your style has been really helpful for me. I'm always trying to say something. I'm like, oh, but do you understand like what I really mean? And she's like, well, they also want to just like read it and be entertained. And so having someone with that keen eye for the parts of writing where maybe, you know, I don't have the most natural inclination toward is really great. And it's one of the parts of the collaborative writing process that I've learned a lot from and that I really enjoy.
Yeah, I can second that about my editor. I've been very much like, I'm going to listen to you because you know how to do this. My book especially follows, uh, in the end, like about three friends, Elizabeth, Benny, and all of them are young girls. And so she's always like, well, I think you got this dynamic great. I can tell you have a lot of sisters or cousins because you realize how young girls this age act, but let's take it up a notch. let's really get into it. And so she's been really helpful in helping me understand all of that. And as far as important topics, certainly I think like Hugh said, I have all of these deep thoughts I want to put in there, and I'm always wondering, am I going a little too far? And sometimes what's great about it, the editor, she says like, no, just say it, just say it. I know you're trying to hold back, like if somebody dies or something, but like just be straightforward. And I guess it reminded me that the books that I loved when I was that age were books that, of course, that were fun, but also didn't hold back, right? Who thought that I could handle weightier topics. And so I try to keep that in mind as I write. And of course, always, I think it's just the natural bit of storytelling because I love world building. And if you let me, I'll just keep building the world. But I always try to remind myself that whatever I'm doing, whether it's a heavy topic, whether it's world building, it's in service of the story. The story has to be there and the story has to draw people in. So that's my answer on that.
Yeah, I think I love both of those answers. I think it's like one of the main thing. I'm more like the fun dial, right? I'm trying to dial up the fun constantly. And I think what helps me the most is thinking about who I was as a young reader. And I would opt out so quickly from a bad story. I just would. I wasn't going to give it 50 more pages. I didn't have that patience as a kid. And I think our generation now has even less, like they got more stuff to do that they could opt out and choose another activity. And so I take very seriously this idea of like, grab them from page one and just keep the pages turning. What does it take to get them even more invested? And I also think that like when we talk about like serious topics too, like so much is serious when you're that age. Like everything feels weighty and everything feels new and like you're exploring it for the first time. And I think one of the cool things for me, so the problem with prophecies is the girl who obviously is witnessing this kid die and having to save him over and over again. And like it's fun for a while, but then she gets to this point where she has to wrestle with who this kid is. And if he dies, that's someone's son, that's someone's brother, that's someone's cousin, that's someone's best friend, that's someone's classmate. Like all the different threads that connect him that suddenly get cut when that happens. And so she wrestles with that moment, and then in the next scene, she's like boarding, a bus to get on to go to the school event that she has to save him at. So there's fun, but there's always these weightier topics that kind of nestle in perfectly. And I don't know. I think editors are a great choice to how to strike that balance perfectly.
Perfect. And because you all kind of touched on this, I think this is a great question to take from one of our Nest members. So Reba Reeds asks, when you write middle grade, how do you keep it from getting too dark?
I believe in the ray of hope. Yeah. You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, yeah.
Sorry. You would think I've done this 1,000 times. I'm still always, you're muted like I'm my dad trying to do this. And so, no, I guess I'm sorry I broke into Scott, but part of it was ray of hope and keeping things fun. That you can have dark topics, but people can still have fun. Right? That you still have funny things happening, even in adventures. You still have um, interesting conversations and interactions between the characters. And I get to do fantasy, so I can have, new magical creatures that you've never seen before. Porcupine Girl just shows up. I can do things that's a great thing about fantasy. I can always throw in something, I was thinking like one of my favorite TV shows from years ago was The Last Airbender, right? And I really loved how, if you think about it, those are some really dark topics about war and all of these different things, colonialism, everything that's happening. It's about imperialism and everything. But on the other hand, there's always humor, and there's always, the fun of the adventure. And there's always, Appa and a dog bear or something. So there's always these ways to keep it light. And so that's how I managed to strike that balance.
Yeah, humor and hope. And then I would also just say, like, middle graders are weird. They're diving into weird, dark thoughts anyways. So I feel like you can't go too, like, it's almost go back to, I think it was Djèlí who said this in the first question, like, taking off the kid gloves. Like, you don't have to pull your punch necessarily. That's not what middle grade means. Middle grade doesn't mean like, oh, at the last second, make it unrealistic so that everyone's safe and sound. It's more like, is there that ray of hope that kind of nestles its way into the ending, so that even if bad things did happen, because like bad things do happen in real life, like we got to wrestle with that, but there are things to cherish, there are things to love, there are things to find that are hopeful and lovely within all of that. And so I don't know, you don't have to pull the punch though, you don't have to kind of dial it back just because it feels dark at times. I think it is more about how do you stick that landing towards the end.
Yeah, no, y'all both said it all. I think the two things came to my mind, and one was endings. I feel like Futureland was the first like happy-ish ending that I ever wrote. Like, and I wrote it, I was like, oh, this feels kind of good. I guess this is why people like these. So just trying to use that recency effect in the mind of like, okay, well, the last thing I read was like on a positive note, for a reader, and leaving them with that. And then I also think, Futureland is my first middle grade project. And similar to something Scott said before, thinking about like who I was at that age, like my friends were everything. And Futureland, like, underneath the, I think, commentary that I'm trying to make on technology and community and all these other things, it's like really just a book about friendship. A kid who's been living in this park for his whole life, who's never had any other like peers or friends of his own, who's making friends for the first time. And I look still, like to this day, I'll look back on some like rough times from childhood, and some of them will even be kind of funny now, because it's like I still have my friends that I can share those memories with. So really leaning into like that friendship aspect, making it a shared experience for not only the characters, but hopefully the reader can feel like they're one of the friend group too, and share that with them.
So I guess kind of going off of that, is that what drove you to write middle grade? Because I feel like such heavy topics can be put into any genre. So what brought you to middle grade for those?
Mine was in response to what I was reading. I was writing a pretty intense young adult book at the time. I was reading Game of Thrones for the first time, which is like just a dark experience. It's just a really tough read. Like there's just not as many rays of hopes in that one. And so as I'm going through those, I remember feeling like I just need something a little softer feeling. And I read, and it's not even that soft. It has its really, really intense moments. But Catherine Valente's The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making, which is a tough title to say. But I remember feeling like she was in a sandbox and she was just having fun as the author. There were so many moments where she was just, whether it was the language or the world building, where she just was taking delight. And so my very first middle grade Saving Fable was just me getting back to being delighted as an author. What does it mean to just play around in this chapter and pull this chord and see where we go? I wrote a middle grade. I try to keep that every time I write middle grade. It's just, I'm here to have fun with this story.
Yeah. So my first summer ever working like as a summer camp counselor, I was 15. And I literally 2 days ago just finished, like, I don't even know what year this is, but it's like over 10 years of camp counseling. And so when I started to write, I just kind of naturally started writing for the kids that were in my camper groups, like that age. Those are the kids that I spent most of my time around and who I felt like I had like a great rapport with when I would go into schools and do different things. Like that middle grade area is always where I felt like I could, be the most help. And so when I think back on this, like I wish I had like some really specific literary drive, but it was like, oh, I've just been around this age of readers, of people for so long that there's a natural comfort here. And if I'm telling stories to anybody, then I want it to be to them.
So basically, your books are a love letter to your kids, and I think that's wonderful.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, for me, part of it was at least this story in this world. I had actually written an adult story set in this world before. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with this world and how, and I was thinking I can write, like this kind of epic Lords of the Rings-ish, but West African type fantasy. And one day I started writing a story and I started writing it from the perspective of someone younger. And there was a way within the world building that looking at it through younger eyes really helped me explore the world a lot more than I was thinking of it as an adult. And I started enjoying it. I think, like Scott said, I think before it seemed more like a chore, and then it became a lot more enjoyable as I started thinking about this younger perspective and how they would see this world, and how, especially someone who's my main character comes from an isolated place, and so everything is new and like, whoa. And I think about, and that brought me back, I think what's been said before. And I think, if, like you saying, if I wasn't writing to kids I was working with, I was thinking about myself at that age and the kind of things I liked. In some ways, I was writing to myself, right? And I thought about the books that I loved and the kind of stories that I liked and the movies that I would watch, right? Like The Never-Ending Story or these kinds of things about the kid who goes off somewhere. And, and I just started really having fun and thinking about it. And as I did, I was like, okay, this is how I want to tell this story in this world now, right? I do want this perspective. And I don't see that I could have, even though I've written one of the story in this world, it's probably more darker and it's an adult story. I really don't see that I could have explored this world the way I wanted to if I hadn't come from this younger perspective, this middle grade perspective.
Amazing. And I mean, realistically, every single world is going to have children, right? So, in your opinion, how have you seen the middle grade genre evolve, and what shifts do you see in terms of storytelling and themes?
I might be the oldest person here, but when I was reading middle grade, like my top stuff that influenced me was like, let's start off with things like The Hobbit, which was really written for younger folks, right? And then, I remember Wrinkle in Time was like whoa, that was the first, oh, it's trying to talk to me as a younger person. And then, I read the Earthsea Chronicles and those kinds of things. And I think one day, much later in life, I walked into a middle grade section and I was like, whoa, for one, it's massive, right? It is nowhere as small. Secondly, I thought the topics and the issues that I was reading within A Wrinkle of Time were really cutting edge adult. And I'm seeing people are really dealing with some heavy topics, some great social topics. And there are all of these different, just so many different stories, so much diversity. Used to be hard to find anyone on a cover that looked like me. Like even the Earthsea Chronicles, I was like, hey, you guys did something to this cover. And I know I read something on the inside that these folks were brown and black and they're no longer that. So just a lot of those things really changed for me as a person looking at it in a long perspective, and just the depth of it now. The fact that there are a whole series, not just one book. The fact that you have, again, such a diversity of characters and such interesting topics. I think sometimes I wish I was that younger again, because I would have tried to read everything there. And I still want to read everything. I don't know if I was like, some days I'll get to Dark Academy. One of these days I'll get to Dark Academy. But yeah, taking me time.
Yeah, maybe from the other side of the spectrum, I feel like, last year was my debut, so I'm pretty new on the scene, and I kind of like was coming up at the time where, so I've heard these categories, these more specific categories were like being officially established in publishing. Before it really seems like there were books that some people had decided like, well, if a younger kid reads this, it'll be okay. But like the main difference I see now is that intentionality behind like how books are crafted, not just what the messages are, but how the language is, what the settings are. Like Jelly is saying, the diversity. Um, to use A Wrinkle in Time as an example, I tried to read A Wrinkle in Time like 3 or 4 different times as a young kid, and I just couldn't grasp it. Like I wanted to like it so bad, but there was some kind of block for me with just understanding what was going on. I don't know, maybe it was the science or I'm not sure. But I felt really kind of discouraged because all my teachers told me that, they thought I would like it and it would be something that I could enjoy, but I just couldn't grab it. And I think now we have intentionality in the category that allows writers to do similar like heavy lifting in terms of messaging, but to make it very accessible to the people that it's meant for. And that's something that I really not only appreciate but excited to like be a part of.
Yeah, I think what a time to be a young kid. I feel like you're right. There's so many authors who are writing specifically for them, like with that as the outset goal. The two things that come to mind for me that like popped up as I was listening was first that I do think sometimes, and I hear a lot of librarians talk about this. There's like a gap where it's like somewhere between like it's like 11 and 13 where we barely have protagonists of those ages typically because they either the industry wants to age them up and make them more accessible for YA, or they want to age them down so it's like perfectly fit for middle grade, and we kind of miss that age sometimes. And then I run into this all the time, whether I visit a lot of schools. I visited 600 schools in the last 6 years, right? And so there's these kids, like so many, we lose a lot of boy readers in this age range. We just do. And that's in part because publishing has looked at that particular age and said, well, boys don't read a whole lot at that age. And then they stop publishing for them instead of the response being, let's publish more books and make it more accessible and more interesting and more everything. They're like, that's not our target market anymore. We'll just publish this instead. And so it's just, there's a part of me that's still just like, I think about that every time I set out to write a book, which is that hope of like writing for those gaps that still exist, even though we do have this like incredible like genre now. We have this incredible age range, but we still have gaps in there that I think that we can keep working on for sure.
I think actually, Scott, that is a fantastic thing to touch on as well, because we have a beautiful opportunity here to talk about the male perspective. Because I think we see so many kids' books or anything really that really leans into the female perspective. How important is it to you to bring in things that are more for boys in this age group?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I feel like because I'm hesitant to just be like, this is the thing that I could write would be for boys. But I do think that those categories exist because publishing and society kind of push them on our young boys very early. And it's kind of frustrating that it has to be that way. I will say like I've had like 1 or 2 book ideas that just got scrapped. Like it never found a home, never found a way forward. And those 2 ideas were the ideas that I think would most qualify as like boys are going to read them, but girls might not. If you write a book where both boys and girls are going to kind of gravitate towards it, that's fine, right? That's great. That's probably ideal. If you write a book that mostly girls are going to gravitate towards, totally fine. There's a market there. But if it's really one that kind of leans towards what boys tend to like, it's like, I don't see how this will sell. And I'm like, it just drives me up a wall. I've had publishers say that directly to me in conversation. I don't know how to respond to it. It's frustrating.
Yeah, if I can just like right on the back of Scott, I'm literally going through this right now, or just like kind of finished a series of conversations about it. Thankfully, not with Futureland, so we're all good there. But with a separate project, like it might something that I wrote as a part of a proposal for an ongoing relationship was assessed as like a boy book, and it was like, And we just don't see the readership being there for this, which is really disappointing on a number of levels. And I think with the opportunities that we do have, like, to write for those gaps, as Scott was saying, like there's so much that we can do. And thinking about writing like about Black boys in particular, which Futureland and my YA stuff that starts to release next year, like there are Black boys at the center of both of the plots. There's been so much figuring like in the editorial process, so many, I think, perspectives from different people with different backgrounds on like how a character should come across, but then also like this character is an avatar in a lot of ways for like a real Black boy. And so being able and having a responsibility to like work through those things and kind of protect Cam and protect Zay, my YA boy, and like bring them to the world in a way like that has dignity, I think is, I didn't realize it was going to be so big of a job, but now that I'm in the middle of it, I see how necessary it is that, whatever character you're bringing to life, you do it in a way that you can be proud of. But for me in particular, working with Black boys, I think there are just so many layers of what that looks like, and some hazards as to how things can be molded and shaped, as they always are, in any editorial process, but ways that make it a little bit different when you're writing about, this group as compared to another group. So yeah, I get excited. I was on another virtual event where a mom told me that her son had never seen a Black boy in a book cover with his hair locked. And it was like, oh man, I didn't even think about that. I just kind of chose a style. And so many other little references that I get from people that really show that like every decision counts. It means something to somebody on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, those are. So I'm trying to think of mine, because my book is obviously, my main character is a young Black girl, and I think I'm like Scott. I want everybody to read my book. I wanted to I'm hoping that one of the things with fantasy is that when I was younger, whoever went on to fantasy, I was there with you, right? It's a quest. I want to be there with you, and yet I understand what he's talking about, and so I'm hoping with Abeni that the fantasy elements of it and everything else is something that everyone can enjoy in that sense. But I wrote a short story for an anthology called Black Boy Joy about a year or so ago, and I wrote a story called Percival and the Jab, and it's about a young Black boy who is coming from the Caribbean, and it's made for that age group, right? He's coming from the Caribbean and he's trying to fit in the United States, and it just so happens that he's brought along this Jab figure, which is a part of the Eastern Caribbean folklore, this large devil-like creature. He's brought one with him, and it wants to hang out, and it's causing mischief, right? And I wrote this short story, and it's really, I think what he's saying, like literally I've been thinking about it as a project, right? Like, what if I expanded that? What if he's now in New York and he can have some interesting fun, since he's got a large shadowy creature that hangs out with him all the time. It's the stuff of dreams. And so I've thought about expanding all that, and I have heard some of the things that he's talking about. I've wondered, would I face some of that pushback if I got that out there? But I'm happy that authors like Kwame Mbilia, who of course did his Tristan Strong, who's also has these really strong young Black male protagonists. I'm hoping, give me the space to write something for this anthology. I'm hoping I get the chance to expand further. I'm hoping the industry wants to do that.
Djèlí, the way you described that, like the shadow and like the fun of the world building with that, I'm just glad you exist, because it's nice when other people, their brains work the way my brain works. It's like seeing it's just such a nice echo of like, oh, I'm more normal than I thought.
Who amongst us does not want a dark, shadowy creature who follows us around at all points and causes mayhem?
Everyone in the comments here is agreeing that we definitely need more books for boys. Britt Reading on the Nest also said that we got to get books out there for boys and the NB kids. But I'm wondering if you have any ideas of what we can do as a community to help push for more books for boys?
Support them when they come out. I feel like that's always what it is. Unfortunately, like we are artists, right? We're writers. We are trying to come at it from this like creative perspective, and then we run into this crossroads where art crosses paths with business, and the publisher, the business entity is just like, look, I want to see dollar signs at the end of it. And it's so frustrating that it's that way, but it's like, unless there's a comp title, right? Or 3 comp titles where they can say, oh, we see the path forward. We know this would succeed because we've seen A, B, and C succeed this way. And so I think a big part of it is just how do we support that? And I also, a lot of my effort is going into schools because I get to just like be present and hand sell and hand books to students. And it's very meaningful, I think, for some young boys to see someone up on a stage who has an interest in creativity and writing and art and like is going to nerd out about their favorite shows and like validate that in front of them, right? Versus like feeling like maybe they write about dragons, but they don't talk about it much because it wouldn't seem that cool. And it's like, of course that's cool. Like I get paid to do that now. It's really cool. And so I don't know. There's lots of different routes, but that's just the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah. Bouncing off of that in a couple of different ways, and to get into like a personal aspect of it. So he doesn't know this, but Djèlí is like one of my favorite authors of all time. Like huge inspiration to me. It's like kind of surreal even being here, you know, in the same like space in this moment. That framed book that he has up there is like it's set in my hometown and then another town that I used to live in, and so like I was able to read this book and see myself in it in ways that like I haven't been able to do a lot over the course of my reading life. And so when I think about like things that inspire, I know that there's something in a readable form that will do that for every boy out there. You know, maybe they're not going to read 1,000 books this year, but they'll find a graphic novel or they'll find some type of novella or they'll find a comic. They'll find something that they enjoy enough that it sparks their imagination and makes them excited about reading another thing or writing their own thing or whatever happens next, right? And so as Scott is saying, like, in spending so much time in the pseudo education realm myself, it's like expanding our minds in terms of what we consider to be valid to read and, you know, that boys can be interested in, giving them as many different options or as possible for the mediums that readable material comes in, and just supporting like what they might like. If they don't want to read this book because it maybe looks a little intimidating or it's too long or like whatever, there's still something that we can find. And so I think we have to do a little bit better job of like encouraging them to consider what they might enjoy, and then also like helping them find those things too, even if they don't look like the traditional reading experience that we have in our minds.
I don't have anything to add to that because I think that's all fascinating. And hey, Hugh, thank you. That meant a lot. You saw me cheesing. Macon, Georgia. Yeah, that's right.
Actually, and Hugh, I think that really leads us well into the next question, which is, as a middle grade author, what role do you believe you play in fostering a love of books and imagination for young readers?
Yeah. I'm on my like aspirational towards Scott level of school visits. Like I do a lot of school visits as well, not quite as many, but they're the best part of the job, as I'm sure like anybody who's done them can tell you. And you know, for my role, I think that I was like gifted this just like love of reading and storytelling that not everybody, that wasn't what they got, right? Like some people love other things or some people don't enjoy reading and storytelling as much, but I consider myself to have like a little bit of a spark that I can share with other people and spark things, you know, for them. And so in terms of, you know, what I see my role as being, it's like, when I go places, how can I share that spark with young people? how can I take something that they may have looked at and thought, this isn't my favorite thing, and make it something that they have to think twice about now. Like, you know what? I thought maybe I didn't enjoy this, but it's not so bad. Like, that book looks kind of cool. This writing exercise was pretty fun. Just and it's not just about the writing or the reading. That when I'm talking about this spark and this inspiration, it's just like the life lesson of keeping your mind open to different experiences and different possibilities. If I can go places and use my love of reading and writing and storytelling to help young people sort of grasp that and start to undertake that endeavor, then I think I'd be happy with what I'm able to achieve.
Yeah, I've always felt like this is my favorite thing to think about, especially for middle grade. It's a little true of young adult, but I think middle grade more is like we are forming their reading canon. Like the things that they like that we look back on and we're like, wow, that's the book that I like fell in love with reading. That's why I love fantasy so much, whatever it might be. Like we get to be that book sometimes. Like I do get occasional messages from librarians who are like, I had this one kid who would not read the whole year, and they like sat down with Nixia for the first time. They sat down with A Door in the Dark the other day, and you're just like, oh, like what a great monumental feeling, what an honor, right? To step into those moments, and it's just I don't know. I find that to be so. I do. It's the only time they always say like, don't think too much about audience; it might ruin your work. I'm like, I don't know. Like sometimes I do look at my work. I'm like, is this a satisfying enough story that if it's like, it's going to make a kid want to keep reaching for the next one and keep grabbing the next book like it? How do I find one like The Problem with Prophecies? Where's another book like that? I always hope that I can accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of like you guys, I haven't done a school visit yet. I get to do my first ones. And so you guys are like the OGs here and doing this kind of stuff. And I can't wait because I think back, my love of what fostered my love of reading was my mom took my sister and I to the library like almost every week. And I'd be coming back with the big stack, right? And and I guess when I write, I try to think about what did I love about reading when I was younger, right? The ability to really get lost in that world and to where everything else is blocked out and I'm there in Narnia or wherever and I'm there, right? And I'm really along with this quest and I love seeing the characters and their interactions. Like Hugh said, I love seeing friendships among young people. I like people who were never friends and then they're forced to become friends or that kind of stuff. I love that kind of stuff. And so I'm hoping that my books can instill in people that love of reading, just getting lost in the world, just getting really caught up in this adventure to the point where you don't want to put it down or you're trying to read after they told you to turn the lights off or you're supposed to be, I shouldn't say this, you're supposed to be doing something else, but in your history book, you got your book.
Yeah.
I want people to have that level of wanting to read where they're like looking forward to, I can't wait to be able to get onto the bus or something and I can sit down and read this. And I just want people to enjoy it like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the bus. Oh man, that made me like. I always would put my head up against the seat in front of me, look at my lap, just like trying to get as many pages before my bus stop. I missed my bus stop one time because the chapter was so good.
Love that. Now we're going to put a pause on questions for a minute because we have a ton of things to give away right now. Jordan has been a little fairy in the comments and picked out a bunch of winners for you guys. So to start, we have 3 1-month subscriptions for OwlCrate Jr. So the first winner is Davy Joe's mom. The next is Slushy Reads, and the last is Pippin. And then we also have a ton of ARCs. So we have about 15 copies to give away. So the first one is going to be from HarperCollins. It's Ada Kabara and the Circle of Shamans. Let's see here, sorry. So the winners there are Katie B, Angie K, Fairy Tamer, Quiet Snooze, Be Dewey 78 is how I'm going to pronounce that.
These are awesome.
Jordan was kind to me today. Yesterday we had some very difficult usernames. Okay, so then the next arc we have is Masters. Sorry, the Kenyon Masters and the Peerless Magic Crew. And the winners for that are Ange, Elise Palace, Lauren, a Library Mouse, and Sarah. And oh wait, no, hold on. I think I'm sorry. These are put together kind of funny. Let me see here.
Go ahead and slide my name in there. These sound awesome.
Eligible.
Yeah, like what is going on?
Okay, yeah, no, Sarah was the last one. Okay, and then the last one is B. Bakshi and the Ginger Sisters. And the winners for that are Zoe Lynn Bilbo Baggins, love it. Kelly Haymans and Tabby Beach 711. So huge thank you to HarperCollins for all of the arcs. You guys are doing amazing. So let's jump into some questions here from the nest. Okay, what's your favorite genre or trope for middle grade? And is there anything you actively avoid?
I'm a found family person. That's like my favorite. Just like when that kind of I think maybe Djèlí mentioned that earlier. That like the unlikely friends, like they just kind of patch together, and like through trial and through difficulty, they realize how much they need each other. Like, oh, I'll eat that up with a spoon. So that's probably my favorite one. And then like I write fantasy and sci-fi. I've tried to write normal things. I just like I would rather a dragon or a spaceship show up. And so it's just the way it goes for me. I can't write normal stuff. And hat tip to anyone who writes like contemporary and this beautiful, brilliant. There's so many authors who do. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I think everything Scott just said. Yeah, I love found family. I love the quest. I love it has to have magic or something. Like I've read some middle grade, and I do remember reading middle grade that didn't, but it's the ones I prefer were the ones that had some kind of magic or science fiction or something in the fantastic. Like, yes, as you know, I love the tension between like you guys aren't friends at all. Like, and I love characters who are tropes, but they end up showing you they're different. So I like you know the mean girl trope. I like let's break that up. Let's make that or the bully trope. Let's see what we can do to maybe get into that person's background and see maybe what brought them there. I like anything that can, you know, complicate the narrative a bit. And so yeah, I'm trying to think of tropes I don't like. I don't know. I like a good. I mean, tropes work because that's why they're tropes. Just like when somebody does something, you know, maybe slightly different with it, or like I said, complicates itself.
Yeah, it's like a tool, right? Like so, it'd be like saying like I don't like wrenches or something. You just got a reason to use it, and you know how you use it. Like there's no wrong trope.
Yeah. I think I'm still figuring out. It's really hard for me to pin one down. And I think I have stuff in YA that I know I don't really care for, but I haven't really figured that out in middle grade yet. Everything still feels possible, like Scott was saying, in terms of how I've executed stuff thus far. Even if I feel like I haven't done the greatest job, it's like, oh, well, I can do a better job next time. Whereas in like YA, there's certain stuff where I'm like, I just don't like that. But in terms of what I do enjoy, and I don't know like all the names. I know some of these are like established things that have like real names. I don't know all the names. But in middle grade, I really enjoy like oblivious parents, like parents that are supposed to be like really like helping out, but they're just not paying attention to what the kid is saying, or like, oh, everything will be fine. And then the kid has this huge like issue that they have to solve without their help. It's just funny to me, because I feel like as adults, sometimes we can not like see the forest for the trees, and seeing that played up in like a way with a lot of hijinks is often like really funny to me.
I can just throw one in there because you brought that up, Hugh. And I guess it's the classic trope is that kind of like related to oblivious parents got to go, right? Because
You get them out of the way.
go off and have an adventure or do whatever. So
Right.
something happened to the parents. Something's happened at some point. You know, the parents are out of the picture, and that's the only way, because the parents would be like, "You're not going to do it."
Right.
I still love those tropes, right? Like that's a classic trope, and I think I heard I forgot who it is, the author of. I'm thinking, but he is basically, I was listening on NPR, well-known author, I'm blanking, but he was like, basically, yeah, he said, so first thing you got to do is get rid of the parents.
Get them out of here.
Right? They got to go. But I got to say, if you talk about breaking up those tropes, for those people who can find a way to keep the parents in there and sometimes keep the parents part of the lives while they're having those adventures, I think that's genius, because the trope has been so much to get rid of them. So if there are books that do that, I think that's just great.
I always think of Onward for that. In the movie, they like restore the dad, but it's just his lower half. And so it's like they got dad, but he's like a liability. Like he's hurting the journey, honestly.
Yeah, I'm trying to do this with Futureland, because that's actually you reminded me, that's another one that, like, I don't dislike it, but I'm wary of it because I feel like it's like an internet joke. People are like, oh, well, the parents aren't around. So like when I'm writing, I'm like, all right, what am I going to do with the parents this time? And in Futureland, we get the parents, and there's stuff going on with them too. But I very intentionally, with the first book, tried to do some conversation around like what it's like to navigate trying to help a young person through like just a radical change. Like I have moved away from the place that I've always known, and now I don't have any friends, and I am scared and anxious, and like I need support. And so there's actually like a fair amount of sort of reflection from the parents about how that experience, how they're perceiving that experience with Cam, and like how it's affecting them. And for a long time, well, I say a long time, the book hasn't even been out a year, but for what felt like a long time in my mind, I was like, I wonder if anybody, really got that part. And then maybe 2 months ago, I got like an email from a parent that was like, I feel like this opened like another slot in my brain. I was reading it with my kid, and I was just thinking about like, oh, these parents are being so like ridiculous. And then I started thinking about some of the ways that I maybe don't always listen when my kid tells me something, or, think I know what's best when really they're living in a different version of the world than I grew up in. And so that really like warmed my heart to see that not only is it something you can read, hopefully that they can read with their kids for entertainment, but that they can be gaining something from it at the same time.
I love that. Now, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but Reading Zebra wants to know, what were some of your favorite books growing up, and what are ones that inspire your writing today?
I'm going to cheat a little bit. I was not a big reader until like 8th grade. The library was kind of intimidating to me. I always felt like it wasn't like libraries today where it's like they got a great display about like, oh, if you like video games, you're going to like this. Like it was always just like a stack of spines. And I remember being like, I'm sure one of those is nice, but and so I think for a long time, my love of writing stemmed from video games. I was playing Halo. I was playing World of Warcraft. I was playing all of these like they're stories, right? They're stories in another form. And I started writing fan fiction of World of Warcraft. That was where I like fell in love with it. And so it took a long time to like roll back to like being a reader and realizing that there were plenty of stories for me, but it took a while. It took a minute.
Yeah, I think what Scott's saying now, I was a reader, or just I've already given you some of my, when I was younger, Wrinkle in Time, the Narnia books when I first read it. Did not understand all of the allegories of the Narnia books until much later in life. until I was a little bit older. I was like, oh, okay. Read, the Hobbit books, read the Earthsea Chronicles, and I was just reading everything. I'm going to date I don't even know if these books still exist, like Danny Dunn, Boy Wonder. It was just all of these books everything that was there, I was reading it. I say that was a great influence, but I think, like Scott, that wasn't my only influence. So I was also influenced by movies when I was younger, like growing up in the 80s, Never Ending Story, The Dark Crystal, right? Like these are things that jog my imagination as much as any book, right? And so I was doing that. Cartoons, comic books. I was a huge comic book head, right? Like I was reading DC, Marvel. I was just all of it. Right? I was just into it all. And so I think, like if people ask me what inspired my writing, like I didn't decide I wanted to be a writer until like after college. I came to it really late. That's not what I went to school for. I have a whole other life that's not involved in writing, and so in writing genre. And so, it really was a lot of different things. And keeping up, my wife and I, we always call it like our keeping up our childish exuberance. So we both still like watching like cartoons, and we still like watching things for younger folks, and we really get into them. So, when I was adult, like, Spirited Away, for instance, was like a huge influence. Or like we watched all of the last Airbender stuff, and then the Korra stuff, right? And so I think all of these, continue to influence me, and I draw on them, when I'm writing now. So, yeah.
I've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and so he's like, my 5-year-old especially is like edging into territory of like, ooh, you're almost ready for Dragon Ball Z. Like we keep getting to like media that I'm like, I didn't realize was so core to who I am and what I write now. And he's like edging into those territories, and I'm like excited about it.
Yeah, I was looking at my watch because it just sent me an alert, like higher than usual stress level detected. I'm just like excited listening to people talk about books and video games and movies. Yeah, like Jelly said, I read everything that I could get my hands on, honestly. And I'm still kind of that way. Like, I don't even have to like it. Reading is like an experience that I learn from. And so even if I read something and I'm like, yeah, like, I'm still like, wow, I did like learn a few things. So pretty much anything, but the Nightmare Hour, the second Futureland, if not evidenced by the title or the ominous cover, I'm a huge horror fan. And so like, if there was a Goosebumps book within any type of like reachable radius, then I was on it. I think I read like all of the Goosebumps books in our school library. And there was one other girl in our school who she was like the other reader. Like we were like the two, reading kids. And like we used to be in the library like tugging books back and forth, like, no, I'm gonna get it. So big reader and big Goosebumps fan as a kid. I played video games not as much, but I watched a lot of movies, and like that fantasy science fiction space in the visual media side was like always it for me. I actually went to college as a film major to work on screenwriting. That was like what I thought I was going to do, but it was hard. Writing novels, I don't know. It's just like I have more of a knack for it. But anyway, like just to name one, Jumanji, the original from like 95. Like I saw Jumanji and I feel like I walked out of my living room like a different person. like the young me was just like, you know what? This world is crazy, but I like it. So yeah, stuff like that influenced me a bunch, and just like I think helped me to learn that you could be like as creative as you wanted to be with a story. And it didn't have to be super realistic or whatever. You could make it really, really out there and it could still be cool.
I love that. I feel like Hugh, you and I grew up in a similar time frame, because Goosebumps was also my introduction to reading. Love it to this day.
Oh yeah.
Wait a second. Did y'all still have the Scholastic book fairs that would come and you'd get that was my day.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. I think we have time for one or two more questions. So, Velocireader says middle grade is so rough. What advice would you give to your middle school selves to cope? Scott's just shaking his head.
I just don't think advice almost doesn't help sometimes. Like you just have to go through it. Like my favorite thing to talk about when I get to speak to the kids at schools, I talk a lot about failing and how important it is to me. Like it's like crucial to who I am to fail and to fail regularly and to be okay with that. But one of the main things is just like I wish I could tell every kid how brave it is just to be themselves. Like just to stop like looking around and trying to figure out how to be like that kid or like this person or like this, like just to be them, like it's such a beautiful, brave thing to do. And it's so hard to do at that age, but when you start learning how to do it, it's so freeing. And so I wish I could teach myself that. I spent probably a decade just trying to be who I thought I needed to be. And I wish I hadn't, but yeah.
Yeah, so much of that time period, what Scott said, is spent comparing yourself. And it's like, it was like the beginning of when I started noticing myself in some ways and that I had to compare. I felt like I wasn't doing that earlier, but there was a sudden age where like what I'm wearing and, you know, how I'm interacting with people begins to shift and change. And you start, yeah, trying to figure out yourself. And a lot of it is comparing yourself and thinking you don't match up to this person or that person. And I think the lesson I had to learn, and it came later, was that so many of those people you think you're trying to match up to, they're doing the same thing, or they don't have it together at all. And like one of my experiences was like the coolest kid in the world in my middle school. Like everybody wanted to be this kid. And we lost contact. We went to different high schools. I see him later, like after college, not after college, like, you know, I'm going up in college, and it's just, and I was like, oh, he's just a regular guy. He's just a person to put on his pants like everybody else. And we're vibing, we're just talking regularly. And it was like, and I totally said, when I was young, you know, I thought that you was like the coolest thing. And he was like, and he tripped me out. He said, like, actually, I used to like the fact that you knew all this stuff about comic books and all this. And so it was this weird way where we were in our own little pockets in middle school and didn't realize that we had all these things in common. Because we were both trying to be something else, and even him, you know, trying to live up to, I guess, what people thought. So it's just this understanding that, you know, you're going to be surprised how much things change over time, and it's just a period where it's normal during this period to be trying to figure yourself out and to try to understand things, and you're not going to have it all figured out now, and that's fine as well.
Yeah, this is way better advice than I have, quite honestly. I am like the person that everybody hated, not in reality, but in theory, because I had like a really great time in middle school. Like it wasn't until later that I started feeling like all the social woes and stuff. So in middle school, like I guess like when I talk to middle schoolers now, I try to remember the things that made my experience so that like even if I was naive to some things that other people were going through, which I think was definitely the case, I try to think about what I was enjoying that maybe sometimes when things are a little bit rough, you don't always get a chance to see. Like I was somewhere with my friends, like all of my friends every single day. It's like, I can't tell you the last time like that's been the case, you know? And we had so many inside jokes, and it was like a bunch of time to spend to just like goof around. Like there were so many things about that age that differ very quickly, like in the next coming years, that I really enjoyed. And so I try to lean on that stuff. I try to remember like what are the things that we can enjoy that, you know, most people might be able to enjoy about this time, and share those and see if there are any of them that young people have going for them. They just sometimes lose sight of because of everything else that's happening. Try to get them to maybe remember.
I think that's a perfect advice from all three of you, honestly. But I think that kind of concludes our time together. So I want to say thank you guys so much for joining us. And thank you to my nesties for joining us as well. We hope you're having a great time with OwlCrate-A-Con. Be sure to keep out for some more giveaways happening outside of the panels too. I know that there's an awesome middle grade art coming from Little Brown Books and Penguin Random House. And don't forget that you can catch the replays of all of these panels that are happening today, as well as any of our past lives and author chats right here in the Nest. And be sure to tune into our next panel where me and my bestie from the Nest, Team OwlCrates Jordan, are going to be talking about taking stories from page to screen with Simon Chiani and Becky Albertalli. And that'll be happening at 2 p.m. EST or 11 a.m. PST. Thanks so much.
Thanks for hosting us.
Appreciate y'all.